Present.
Mario Perez,
Here.
Phoenix Askovich,
Present.
Rose Burke,
Present.
Brandy Heindel.
Present. And then can I ask, there's staff here, please introduce yourself.
Jerry Hendricks, Acting City Manager.
For the record, I am Pervez Mohit, City's Director of Finance.
I'm Christiana Spencer, I'm the HR Human Resources Manager.
Amber Lewis, Assistant City Manager.
Emily Hughes, Assistant City Secretary.
Thank you. So now we'll open up to citizens' comments. You are each allowed 3 minutes. Lila?
My name is Lila Knight, sorry. And I just wanted to say that I really like the proposed, the draft of the credit card and reimbursement policy. I think it's very, very comprehensive and will address many of the abuses that have been done in the past. I believe somewhere it did state that the city council would be required to have a per diem for meals and travel. But I just looked it up, the current per diem for meals is $55 a day. And there are a number of charges on the credit cards for almost twice that. And I would hope that our city council members would want to keep as much of the business here in Kyle rather than going to Buda or Austin or Hay City Store. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak at this time? There's no other citizen that wishes to speak, so we will close for citizen comments. I think at this time we should approve the previous meeting minutes. Secretary, if you wish to give us the brief recap of by bullet point what we did cover last meeting.
At the last meeting, you guys discussed wanting to be able to receive the credit card policy, the draft one. You wanted to compare other cities around Kyle and what they do for their city council members. You also wanted to talk about the mileage reimbursement and other things that go along with that. And we talked about if you would be just discussing compensation or also if you would need to be discussing like a credit card policy as well. And that's what I have.
Is there a motion to approve the outline of the minutes that we have?
A motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. The previous meeting minutes are approved as written. I don't really think we have technically any old business, so we'll just move on with the agenda. So we are here as the Council Compensation Committee to review the compensation policy for the council and the mayor of the city of Kyle. And in a related matter, we may discuss some of the current credit card policies and what items may be allowed as expenses. At this time, I guess I'll open it up for anybody to provide comments. I know Phoenix, you had questions about some expenses previously, prior expenses too, and I didn't know if you had any, you got your answers in.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to, if you remember last week, one of my big questions is what are we here to talk about, right? You guys all remember that subject. And I felt like we were discussing the credit card transactions ad nauseum last week, right? And as I understood it, we were here to talk about the compensation as a whole. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a desire from this committee to propose a recommended means of monitoring or approving transactions, and I don't disagree with that. But I think one of the most important things that we have from a timeline perspective is that we have to propose a budget or propose any changes to the budget. So they've already got a high-level proposal for the budget. The question is do we have any desire for changes? Do we want to add any additional pay to the council members, such as healthcare benefits or additional pay or any of these things? I think that is top of what has to be, I think, concluded through this, because it has to go to vote, right? And so as such, we've got to get to that. So I wanted to also point out that on page 3 of the packet that Jerry had put together, that he did put in the city charter, which discusses exactly what we're here to talk about, right? And that is that every 3 years, there has to be a vote by a committee, or a recommendation by the committee for any changes to the compensation. That is what we are, right? The question is do we, and I'm not asking this as an answer right now, but the question at large is, do we feel that there needs to be any changes to the policy? That's the large question. A tack-on question is, how do we deal with these credit card transactions? That's how I see it. So I just wanted to put it out there as such.
Any other comments from any committee member in regards to what Phoenix was saying?
I also want to point out, and you guys all know this, you guys see it. If you don't see it, one of the things that I think is genius that the city staff has put together for us is a comparison of other cities: Kyle, Buda, Leander, Pflugerville, New Braunfels, and San Marcos. So if we wonder, as an example, what do they get paid? Not only what do they get paid, I asked him, one of the things I had asked him to include was, how do they expense things, right? What are their expense policies, right? Because I think that one of the underlying concepts is that some council members may be using an expense policy that's not well defined as benefits, right? So nobody said that, but I think that's a general feeling as to why it's such a political conversation, right? As such, what do they get paid? What is the outline for them? So that is all right here in this document, which I think was very nicely done. So if you're curious, what does, as an example, San Marcos, what do they pay their council members? $14.50 a month, $1,700 for the mayor, and then of course they've got personal services, contract services, material and supplies, and then other charges, all documented, right here. So again, I'm not suggesting that we need to mirror ourselves after San Marcos. We're not as big a city as they are, right? But if you wonder, then as an example, Leander pays their members nothing as it relates to compensation, right? So direct compensation, but then they do pay an expense budget, right? So it isn't as though they're asking their members to do these things for free. They're expensing those back. So that's the high level. I think that if we take away anything, that it needs to be these things. Then as it relates to how we conclude this meeting, that's my opinion. So sorry guys, I'll yield the floor to you guys. Anybody have any views on that, thoughts? Has everybody had a chance to look this over? Yeah, the compensation for the other cities. So again, just as a summary, we pay our council members $1,000 a month. That was in fact raised from 3 years ago from $100 a month. As you guys probably remember, it was quite an event. So part of the charter then says that every 3 years we need to visit this subject, right? The mayor compensation is $1,300. They have access to all the city benefits. They just have to pay for it themselves, right? And then of course, the operating budget, Jerry, or I apologize, Pervez, this personal operating budget here doesn't seem to match what we discussed earlier, just a little bit ago, when we talked about the 354 and then the 54 per. I don't understand those numbers that you have here for Kyle. The personal, 94,380, contractual services, 105. What is, can you explain that part to me a little better?
I'm going to let Christiana explain that.
Okay.
Put
No
those two
problem.
together.
Those figures actually came from the previous fiscal year's budget. It's
Okay.
listed on the website, yes.
Okay, so then this isn't a divided by, this is a total.
Right.
Okay, got it, that makes sense. That number makes much
Right,
more
but
sense.
also included in your backup is separated out city council member cost centers.
Right.
But they,
Right.
from last year?
From the year going forward, should it be approved that way?
Right, I understand. So,
So let me do something for y'all that would be very helpful, I think. So if everyone would switch to page 19 of your handout.
the documents, oh, there it is, 18, 19.
You see the numbers are in
Yeah.
Sharpie,
Yep.
circle numbers. So 19, and then right after, that's the last council district, which is District 6. And then on page 20 is a summary. You can see at a glance, if you add up all 7 cost centers, what would the total be? So on this page, on page 20, you'll see the actual expenditures incurred by council in fiscal year 2019-20. That's the first column. If you roll all the way down, they spent a total of $171,202. The fiscal year right after that, in 2020-21, which was the last fiscal year, they spent about the same, $171,179. The current fiscal year that we're in, that we're operating in, is fiscal year 21-22. The approved budget for this year, for all 7 council members together, is $224,928.
Right.
And then the column right after that kind of gives you a feel for how much have they spent of that through June 30. So as of June 30, they have spent a total of $134,067, roughly half of that budget.
Okay, and there's no breakdown as to which members spent which.
No, because they're all combined, it's
Right.
hard to separate individually. Our goal is
It's the
now,
cost center concept.
it's
Yep.
the cost.
That way
separate
we can
cost.
have transparency
Exactly.
per member as
Exactly.
to what they're spending and how they're doing against the
For each
budget.
line item,
Yep.
you will be able to see very clearly every single month.
And so that,
So
Go
if
ahead,
you
sorry.
take that one step further, for next year, if you add up every 7 cost centers, the proposed budget for next year is $354,834. Because you lose some of that efficiency by combining 7 council members together. Now they have, each one of them has their own office supplies, their own travel.
they didn't have that before?
They had it before, but you had it all.
How do you
Together.
how do you lose efficiencies?
Well, when you have 7 together, not 7 are gonna spend, right? Exactly the same amount. So some spent more, some spent less.
I'm a little confused by that.
And I'll show you. I'll show you individually.
If you were to take 224 and just divide it by the 7,
No,
why couldn't you do that?
It doesn't really make sense when you go down to individual lines. It's easy at the bottom line level, but when you break down by individual itemized line item expenditures, when you divide by 7, some of those line items will not make any sense at all if you divide by 7.
Can you
It's-
give an example besides the office expenditure? Because that one I don't agree with.
Travel,
Travel would make sense, but can you give an example?
membership,
No, I'm sorry, of the travel. Could you give an example of how the division doesn't make sense now? So if you had 224, you divide it by the members, how could we not prioritize as a council member? How could I not prioritize my own 1/7?
because each council member will have their own travel requirement, right? One may want to go to Washington DC, another may want to just go to San Antonio, right? So
Yeah, but why are you increasing it to suggest that it's okay to go wherever you want to go? In
it
other words,
just is, okay, so what's in the proposed budget is just a suggested amount for
I understand,
for the discussion to start. It doesn't have to be that.
I understand.
So your recommendation could be, hey, lower it, cut it in half. Council may look at it and say, no, I don't agree with that. We'll go 75% of that, whatever the number is.
If, I apologize, I'll stop talking here soon, I promise. But if I'm looking at these lines, I can't see where that increase happened. Where did that?
Can I
Sure.
add in there, line 10, it appears in the 2022-2023, we're actually budgeting mileage that doesn't appear to be budgeted previous years.
And
Is
it's
that
an
something that we're planning on giving in that budget?
We're anticipating, no, we're anticipating that if council was to claim mileage rather than fueling the vehicles, then we need to allow for that, right? So we're planning that in the budget.
Right.
That, I'm assuming, these are all my assumptions.
Right.
No one has given me any
Right.
numbers from council.
So just for
No,
clarity.
we're just
so-
trying to understand.
right.
We're
So just for clarity, as you're asking, because that's one that I do see as a difference in the budgets over the
Okay.
years, is the 24,000. In previous years, are we making the assumption then that they were reimbursed by tanks of gas, or why is there such a
Okay,
large
so
variance?
if you go back, years back, then just last fiscal year, no one claimed mileage, no one claimed gas.
Okay,
Year 21 was the first year that we started seeing gasoline expenses being reimbursed. So if the policy is going to be no fuel expenses, then the only alternative is to give them mileage. So we're accounting for mileage. And I can explain, if you look at page 20, you can actually see the differences, where the increases are or decreases are.
Right.
In the proposed increase, decrease column, the second to the last column on your right.
But you get, like as an example, legal services here from 10 to 35, and what I don't understand is why would we actually budget legal services there instead of just have a bucket, a cost center bucket, and then if they need this, you're putting $35,000 into a category that they may not even need. So I'm curious.
Well, okay, so let me explain to you what is happening today.
Okay.
Maybe that will make
Maybe that,
sense.
yeah.
So when council has a legal question, our attorney is not a staff, is a contractor attorney. So we pay the attorney by every 10 minutes. So when a legal question is posed by council, that attorney bills us. Mayor and council doesn't really have a budget for legal today or in the past. So what ends up happening is that is run through either the city manager's office, depending on the type of question. It may run to the planning department if it's a planning related question. If it's an administrative type question, it runs to the city manager's office. If it's a financial type question, budget question, it runs to my cost center. What we're saying now is, if you want transparency,
Then here's how you get it.
This-
And that makes, and this one makes sense why it increases. This is one of those that don't divide up nicely,
Right,
right? Because
right.
you have a $10,000 previous as a bucket. She may use $100 and I may use $7,000.
Right.
How do you divide it up? That makes perfect sense. I got that. So this is an example of one.
Just want to note that the budget is 5,000 times 7, so all 7 individuals have a $5,000 budget.
as a starting
as a
point for
starting
discussion.
Right.
Right.
So I guess on that, I would expect to see the legal budget go down in all those other departments.
Right. So what she's saying is you just got through using the example that you were billing some. Now everybody's gonna, so that if you were to increase this one,
Well, you won't see a corresponding dollar for
Decrease.
dollar decrease because their business is increasing at the department level. The attorney's rates are increasing, right? So,
On some of this stuff, I know they have a budget, but what's going to prevent somebody from just saying, I gotta spend my budget? Because I looked at the meals, for example, and maybe the meals will give me the same thing where somebody was eating meals with somebody else, and it wasn't, their meals were part of, they went out with somebody they went out with the city manager, so the city manager paid for the meals, and now they're gonna turn in their own receipt. I understand, maybe that's where you're going, but I have a hard time with, meals was 6,000 last year, and we're going up to 54,600, and that's 7,800 for each individual, which I think they're gonna go, and like you said, I know from looking at the actual expenses, some of them haven't hardly had any. So are we giving people a license like, well, I get to spend $7,800 in meals, so I'm gonna go
I think-
have some lunch?
Yeah.
I don't know what do you, Brad, you have?
No, that's an excellent point. One of the things the legal one kind of bothers me because that spurred, so, I mean, I'm gonna be superfluous here and say, a council member sneezes and we have a legal question. All of us have watched enough council meetings, they ask a random question and I see $500 float out the window. And I actually think that's bad at one level, but not at the other, because I don't want them constrained by a legal budget. So I don't necessarily agree with that one, but I do have an overall question. The growth of the budget for the general city expense funds. Here's I'm calculating, this is about a 25% increase when you take out that legal line. Is the city budget growing at 25% year over year?
Depending on, overall, if you're looking at?
Yeah, just over,
Yeah.
general numbers.
Yes.
Okay, so that's in line?
Yes,
Okay.
it's in line. Because some departments are going higher.
Oh,
than-
yeah.
So the average, you're absolutely right.
Okay, so that was the first thing that popped out is when you look at that 354 versus, 224, you're kind of like, wow, where did all that come from? Take out legal, take out mileage. It starts getting a little bit more reasonable, but I had that question.
Well, so,
Yeah.
go ahead, sorry, Brett.
No.
So one thing that I think is interesting is that meal, the food and the meals, 54,000 in the proposed, it was 11,000 last year. If they go into cost centers, is there a means then to be able to make sure that even if the city manager is paying for those meals, that there is still a division, a cost management piece that goes to each member?
Yes.
Or is there a means, or are they gonna use that as a means to hide? I didn't spend any on meals, look at this, yet
It
the city
becomes
manager.
better because you,
Yes, if the policy is adopted and it's clear enough that the meal receipt must identify who was at the table, then we can allocate it to each individual
Budget.
council member's cost center.
Right. And that would then be transparent to us?
Yes.
Us meaning the citizens?
The citizens, the
Yes.
taxpayers, yes.
so are we doing that on a department level now? Say a department manager takes their team out for lunch, or two departments go out to lunch, do they split it by a cost center now?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's not transparent, I can't see it. I asked that question multiple times and I could get the credit card transactions. So if I wanted to see what we're spending on credit cards, and you could see that Rick Cock was spending, was spending this amount, but then, like as an example, I used the Peachtree City as an example. The Peachtree City trip, I know I told you this already. I went and looked, Rick Coach spent $600 and something on that, 400 of which was for 3 golf carts that the other 2 members used as well. So $600 was for Rick, $34 was for Dex, I think, and then Michael Tevez, 0. And so I knew that he didn't go there and spend 0. He had to eat. He had to have a hotel against his budget. Yet I can't see that. There's no means for me to be able to see that.
So-
right?
I really like this setup. The numbers, it's a guidance, and so I'm gonna ask another question, and if I'm monopolizing time, please tell me to be quiet. So I'm gonna pick on the legal one again, because y'all already know I don't like that one.
$500 going out the windows right now.
Yeah. What happens when they hit $35,000? Let's say we have especially litigious questions coming and we blow through. Does that have to go back for a budget amendment? Or what's the trigger for the council having to recognize they're spending too much money?
So our standard process is that each cost center owner receives a monthly report of their budget status by line item. So in this situation next year, each council member will receive their cost center report. If we as staff find that they're getting close to their budget, we will bring that to their attention. And to answer specifically your question, if they are, let's say Councilmember Rizzo has come close to, I'm just using this as an example. So let me clarify the record.
How about Councilmember A?
Heck, okay, Councilmember A reaches their legal budget, so we'll bring it to their attention. And my recommendation as the Director of Finance would be at that point that we proceed with a budget amendment.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask the opposite side of that, because I understand the legal side, but how will we handle the travel and so forth when they get close to their limit? Is there anything in there saying like, sorry, you can't travel no more? Sorry, you can't spend
Yes.
anymore,
Yes.
anything like that?
That's
And
exactly
is
what
that something we're
With-
looking at? Because I didn't see anything clause in there that like, you're capped.
The question for Prabhas, so let's say one of the line items is exhausted. Can you get funding from another line item as long as you meet the overall budget?
No, let's say if they have busted their travel line item, that will not allow them to make the difference from, let's say, office supplies
Right.
or from food and meals, no.
Okay.
What happens if they just travel because they have a credit card?
If they come back and they bust their budget, it's gonna be recorded as overspent.
Right. But there's no means to get that money back from them at this particular moment, right? You guys all work for them, not the other way around, right? So, what happens?
Yeah, I just want to add, there's another part of this, that in the charter, the council is a judge of its members.
Right.
We don't want to be pitting staff
Right,
against
and that's
council
exactly, I
members.
was just about to
So-
segue into that, Brad. You mentioned this last week, right? And I don't know if you meant it this way, but one of the things I think that we need to make sure to propose is that exactly this. They are their own peers' judge, right? So they should have a subcommittee meeting that discusses this, because surely they're gonna come up with something that doesn't categorize anywhere here, right? So as long as it fits, how do you stop
Well,
that?
I would, just to facilitate that when we send call centers out to each individual council member, that each individual council member would also get the call centers for the other council members.
I think so as well. Transparency, not just between the citizens and you guys or them, but between each other. So
Right.
that, because as the means to be able to start picking this apart, and making them want to get within line, starts with their peers.
But I have to ask, how is that making it actionable to keep staff?
It doesn't.
To me, it's wonderful on transparency, but it still puts y'all back in the line of fire. And I think you attested to this during the
The council meeting.
council meeting.
But remember, staff doesn't work, the council doesn't work for staff. Staff works for council.
No, I agree, but my point is, and I think this is something that, take all the numbers, take all the personalities out of it. What's that mechanism for someone to say no? Because I'm almost a fan of
It's
it.
a judge. I mean, it's a vote.
That's exactly it. So I'm almost a fan of a lower budget. And let's talk about Washington DC. I'm gonna pick on that one because that's one we all kind of know about. But at that point, shouldn't there be I want to call it a supplemental budget request that says, hey, 4 members of council, X number of members of council want to go on this trip. In a council session, they actually amend the budget to say, here's a line item with a budget for that DC trip. And that's not part of the lined out, because in my experience, you never know when a conference or something is going to come up that is going to be beneficial. And that kind of gives a trigger to make council approve those things beforehand. Because those are the ones that are the high dollar, where you're heading out of town, you're staying at a hotel, you're on per diem for multiple days. And I would be a fan of the budget being local. I read that in your policy, there was a 75-mile in and out. That was a really good structure on that saying, and I'd almost like to see the under 75 be in the normal budget. Anything outside of the 75 have to be approved by council as a whole as a budget amendment and held to that, because you should have that amount.
I like
And
that proposal. Go ahead.
What I was looking at and through business and everything like that is if the travel is to exceed $250 and, along that line, it has to be approved for that additional cost. So because if they're going to San Antonio for a conference, I don't want to shut things down that they're not attending those events. But I think if it hits, if your travel, hotel and everything's gonna be over $250, then it has to be approved, because I know even from a business aspect, you have a line that management has to approve before you can take that trip.
Right, but see, here's the analogy though that we have to keep in mind. City council is literally like the board of directors of the company, and the only person that keeps them in line is the voters, the people who own the stock. These guys aren't there that means, right? So the person who, so transparency, putting it on a piece of paper, and then having a committee meeting that says, you've got to approve this, is what you just said a second ago, it's above this travel. So we need to, as a committee, approve this. You know the other council members aren't going to easily approve this, right? Because they're their own judge in that regard, right?
Well, to me, it pivots it back to them.
Mhm.
You know,
That's my point. That's exactly right.
it gets them, it defends city staff or puts that wall between staff
exactly right.
and council so that there isn't that pressure of, there's no one approving.
Mhm. These guys shouldn't have to, it's each other that should have to in that regard.
And I don't know if any cities do this. Is there a subcommittee? Has anybody ever heard from, I'm looking to city staff to y'all, of a subcommittee at the council level that is an expense committee?
There's not.
But there can be, though. That can be part of our recommendation.
It can be.
right?
So
Yeah.
I just want to remind you guys that the charge of the committee is compensation, and to talk about the reimbursements in the budget is fine in considering what they spend. But ultimately, your recommendation to the council for the election in November is adjusting their compensation.
Right.
So, and if we want to, and we don't have to solve policy recommendations between now and the 16th.
Right.
If you guys want to keep going and talk about that, if it's the council's charge to this committee, that's great. But we're at a timeline to solve is compensation.
You're right, but the compensation was this budget.
Right,
The budget, and I think that part of what most of this conversation's been about is how did that budget get to this level, right?
So, and let's not confuse compensation with reimbursement for expenses.
Right, I understand. But
So-
the budget number, what's gotta be voted on, is that number right there? Or an amended version of that number, plus any compensation, right?
Or is it
No,
just?
I don't think.
$354,000?
I don't think this committee really addresses the budget, unless it's in terms of how the council is compensated.
Right.
An example would be a fuel allowance. Now, there's money in here for mileage reimbursement, but I'll tell you from my own personal experience, filling out that form, I'd rather just not get paid than fill out that form. But I get a car allowance.
You're getting no love
So-
here, I'm just saying.
And there are members of our council, we have a very active council. Some cities don't always have an active, but our council is very active and very engaged in the community and all the stuff that's going on here. A lot of them work in Austin, a lot of them will make trips into Kyle for meetings, and then we'll go back to their job in Austin, and they incur those, it's not only gas, but it's wear and tear on their car, and I won't even talk about their time. So that's one of the things that I think the council would like you to consider is, would you recommend a vehicle allowance as part of their compensation? So those are the kind of,
Isn't that in this budget?
in the form of mileage reimbursement,
Right.
where they would have to track their miles.
It's an estimated mileage for the year. of
So
20,
if it's,
20.
if it's a vehicle allowance, it's a set amount, and it doesn't matter how much or how little they drive, that's part of their compensation.
So then this committee's charter is not to determine if this $354,000 is in line or not? In other words, part of what we're trying to determine here isn't this, who sets this budget?
Well, the council ultimately sets the budget.
Right.
But what you see in there, their salaries and their compensation for their time, if you will, is the top part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything underneath that is expenses that they could incur on their city purchasing card and have it paid for there. That's a different policy.
Okay,
That's not part of their compensation.
okay.
Because if they weren't being reimbursed for it or being able to pay for it through the purchasing card, then that would be something they're paying out of their own pocket.
Mhm.
The compensation is what we write them a check for every month.
Okay, so let me back up. First, we'll back up. Let's just go over the first part, which is the salary. Is there anybody, is there a motion to just leave the salary the way that it is and move on with the salary. Does anybody feel that there needs to be?
I'd like to make a motion to leave the current salary as is for the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay.
I've done a comparison with other cities based on their population. And it looks like it's right on target.
Second?
Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Does your motion take into consider what Jerry was mentioning about mileage?
No.
I think it was
Okay.
just
No,
referencing
okay.
compensation.
I just want to make sure.
I'll bring that up separate.
Okay.
So motion passed to,
Did you vote?
Yeah. I think
oh, we
need-
did vote, oh, sorry,
I
excuse me.
would, so just so we're all clear to kind of capitalize on Brad's, is what you're motioning for is to keep the $1,000 per month that city council receives and $1,300 that the mayor receives on a monthly basis,
As it is.
as is.
As is, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear
Yep,
that
Twelve
there's.
thousand towards council members and 15,600 for the mayor.
Okay.
all those vote,
Aye.
yes? Say aye. All those four say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passed to keep the salaries for the council and the mayor at the current levels. Okay, so to move on, which is kind of integrated with the budget, and we were talking about some of these things. I think it's well noted that there's some strong feelings for, challenging the 57.76% increase in the budget, so from last year. Especially when I see that with the run rate for this year, it is not that much over the budget last year. What we were expecting to be at 233, budget last year, for this current year is 224, want to increase it to 355. So some of them I understand is being maybe because it's being specifically taken out of other departments where it may have been in other departments mixed in there. I do think there are things that are kind of related to compensation. You know, it's not salary, but it is something that, like if you go to work for another company, you know, what's covered? Do I have a car allowance? Do I get money for my cell phone? Are my, travel, where do I get to travel? That kind of thing. So the mileage rate, just kind of back to that. From what I compute, do we pay IRS rates basically right now?
I think so.
Yes.
So,
58.5 cents.
oh, it's 58, it's not .625, 58? I don't know why I got the 65 from.
Maybe IRS is updated moving forward.
Just to clarify, if the voters were to, if you were to recommend and the voters were to approve a car allowance, then that mileage reimbursement would come out of the budget.
Okay.
That line item would come out, and instead, it could be divided into an actual allowance. That's the
So
point.
just for clarity right now, the mileage is, it'd be about 6,050 miles per person right now is what's being budgeted for. The other thing I want to throw out here too, most all the line items, again, they have the mayor and the council the same. I guess I understand that in some ways, but in other ways, I tend to think maybe the mayor does a little more traveling, maybe has more meetings. I can be, on average. So just kind of question whether maybe some of the resources should be divvied up different. Just throwing that out there. But I do think maybe we discussed, like, there isn't anything in there for phones right now either, right?
There is a wireless data services, but it's empty.
Yeah.
It's empty. Now, let me just ask a quick question. Is that 24,570, is that the proposed mileage? That's.
Yeah.
And that's divided by,
It's 3510 per person.
okay, right, per year.
Right.
Right, so-
For the life of me, I can't imagine that we're even having this debate, to be honest with you. I feel like we should divide that up and give them that as an allowance. Personally, it makes perfect sense. Why would we debate this at all? I mean, it's such a small amount, and we know that they're traveling, we know that they're doing these things, so My proposal, I guess if I could put an amendment, or whatever you call it, is that we do take that budget, divide it by the the council member, and then just give it as an allowance. That way, credit card transactions per, oh, look how much they're spending per, gas mileage or whatever, or gas, and then it takes the onus off of them from having to fill out a mileage report. It's just easier to me. So it's such a small amount. I don't understand why we wouldn't approve that as a.
Sure, I just add that, we don't have a good track record per council member, what they spend in mileage or fuel or anything. So we put placeholders in there in the budget, and then we track that. Next year, we'll have a better idea what actual expenses are.
Yep.
So the typical, for city staff, the typical vehicle allowance is $500 a month.
But right now, it's $300 a month. It's $292 in this budget.
That's what we budgeted for mileage reimbursement.
Yeah, right, for mileage reimbursement. And I'm saying that $292 a month. We're asking you to go to these meetings. We're asking you to use your own car. As you mentioned, some people are coming in from Austin. This is a small amount, personally. That's my view. So that would be my recommendation. But obviously, you guys are the majority here, so I'd like to at least put it out there for a vote, to see what people think.
I'm not a fan of allowances because allowances are given to you whether you use it or not. So I'm not a fan of allowances. I don't agree with giving people money if you are somebody that isn't maybe going to the individual councils. I mean, I've seen they all don't spend the same amount of time and effort on everything. So I think it is a good idea, like Jerry said, you have a better idea after next year, once you're tracking it, what maybe you can look at an allowance at that time and see what people are really, I think allowance of anything is kind of hard right now until we track it once with all these cost centers and you can get a better idea of what's an average, because I know some of these things probably, you probably set them up because you saw, well, this person spends, this amount per month on meals, and then you have somebody that has nothing. Well, you can't budget everybody at nothing, and you don't want to hurt the person that's actually out there going and doing business and having all these meetings and saying, well, because this person doesn't spend any, you can't have any either. So I do think you have to come to some happy medium, and I think once you track these cost centers, I think you'll be able to have a better discussion of what's reasonable, what's, above. But I do like Brad's idea too about keeping it lower and then asking for, that wasn't Brad, that was.
Well, then that's not a bad idea. So here's my problem with what you just said, though. Because what you just said is you drive your own vehicle and you never bill anything back because the process, not because there's politics involved for you, but because the process is too hard.
Right, I don't now, but I get a vehicle allowance now.
Oh, okay.
I didn't before because it's just too cumbersome.
And so you didn't.
I did not.
So you drove your vehicle. So my point is there may be some council members who are like, you know what, forget it. I'll just drive my own vehicle, and others who will reimburse it. So the average will be less because some people aren't consuming, right? So why don't you just, in this case, offer that allowance, but lower it to something you feel like is reasonable. $50 a month, $25 a month, $100 a month. The point I'm getting at is I feel like it is something that is worthy of it. But if not, you guys tell me. So
I think this cost centers it's way overdue. I think having in previous years just a pot of money, and anybody that wants to travel or have meals, or they'll go into that pot, and then people that are not traveling are being left out. So I think this is just a perfect direction, having 7 cost centers. Each elected official will be responsible for their line item. You got $5,000 allocated for travel. You have to decide which conferences are you going to attend that year. As a former department head, that's what we did. Which conference you want to attend? We only have so much money. And I believe that, even with every line item that's listed on here, do the same thing. Can I afford that? If not, I have to start cutting back. Those are my thoughts.
I agree.
Agreed.
Can I ask a question about mileage versus reimbursement? Does it change the liability profile for the city depending on whether somebody is doing mileage or gets a set vehicle?
conversation.
I know here I rail against legal questions and then I ask one.
Let me get the attorney on the phone.
So, when it comes to allowances, the flip side of that same coin is we have to keep in mind the IRS rules and requirements of the city as an employer. So there's two ways of accounting for mileage transportation expenses when it comes down to. And it all is dictated by the IRS. This cumbersome form process that Jerry just described, I'm a perfect example of that. I don't want to do that. So I donate my money to the city, and I'm okay with that. I know a number of other city employees and department heads do the same thing. That cumbersome process is dictated by IRS. You have to show your starting destination, your ending destination. You have to show your starting odometer and your ending odometer, because in IRS rules, they are reimbursing you. The employer is reimbursing you for your actual expenses incurred. There's no profit, no extra money. That is for your gas, use of your vehicle, wear and tear, insurance, what have you. So mileage expense reimbursement is one method they allow. The other method they allow is the car allowance method, which is, there's two sets of car allowance method. One is under the accountable plan, is we'll give you a set amount of money, Mr. Council Member A. If you spend less than that, then you're obligated to refund the difference to your employer. And then if you follow that plan, then it will now be counted towards your W-2 income. It is expense just like mileage, but you're accountable for reconciling each month, and you reimburse the city for the overpayment, or you bill the city for underpayment. The other allowance method is a flat rate. You get to keep whether you spent more or less. However, we as employer, we're required to put that on your W-2. That is a taxable income for that person receiving car allowance.
Is it a match-based taxable?
Match, meaning?
So the city has to match much like straight employment tax. Is it a?
Yes.
It's considered
So-
wages, like any, it's
So
just considered
you-
plain wages. So again, that is increasing the salaries, which we just approved.
And that's where I was headed, is that is the kind of linchpin on that vehicle allowances. And
The payroll taxes, it will be subject to payroll tax calculation.
Yeah.
at the
And
end.
social security and
Oh,
additional
yeah, no.
taxes for additional taxes for the employer.
I've had to balance them. Trust me,
mean,
I understand
I-
painfully.
You won't find me being sympathetic about reporting mileage, because I've done it all my life for every place I've ever worked, and.
Sorry, Jerry. She's not sympathetic.
But, there are ways to automate some of that and make the forms easier and that kind of thing too. So maybe if it's too cumbersome, there's ways to, to handle that. But, again, here nor there, again, they're gonna decide what they want to do with the mileage, and, it's.
Right, and it wasn't there last year, so either way is a benefit to them, right?
Right, but I just recommend that you take the taxing part of that into account when you fixing a dollar amount.
Yep.
Because if you're gonna give them $300, they're gonna lose a quarter to a third of that. in
Right,
taxes.
I understand, but that's what my point, the point she's making is that she leans against that. And my point is at this particular moment, there actually is a line item for that, where there wasn't last year.
Correct.
Right, so the only thing we're adding to them is the cumbersomeness of this, is the point I'm getting at, right? So,
I think they were always allowed to turn in mileage though before. They just weren't. I think the council members that was what they were to do, was to turn in mileage,
Yeah.
right? You just didn't budget for it, but.
Right, if they would have turned it in, we'd probably just run a deficit in that line item. I'm gonna make that adjustment in the next.
But there-
budget.
but there
was
wasn't a line
nothing-
item at all.
There was nothing, they weren't told they couldn't turn they've never been told under my understanding, they've never been told they can't turn in mileage. They had the means to do it, it just either wasn't separately reported or they just
They had
didn't
the
do it.
means, or they just did it because, so remember my conversation I had just a moment ago, is the council members don't report to these guys. It's the other way around, right? And so that's the whole judgment of expense, right? So there is no line item, yet they were doing it anyways, is the point I'm getting at.
No, what I'm saying is when they were told they could turn in mileage,
Were they?
I don't know if they ever asked.
So they were just doing it, is what your contention is.
No, they were
When they asked to be reimbursed for any expenses that they made during a travel, a conference, anything like that, if they presented all things and
That's
said,
travel, though, right?
well, but I'm saying they go to a conference, they drove their own vehicle, they had their hotel, they had their meals, they would say, oh, can I get my mileage too? And they would go, kind of scenario. It wasn't, they were told no, or they were given a list and said, fill out these 3 dotted lines. I think that's why we are here as a committee, is they weren't given this is what you're allowed, and we're monitoring it.
Right.
I don't think that's why we're here as a committee, but I think it is part of what we're trying to
It
discuss,
spurred
yes.
the
yes.
conversation.
Right, but that isn't the reason we're here as a committee.
So,
I think the other difficulty too is if you're the mayor, the council member, and you're going around all day, you're driving all day around to several different meetings, lunch, you're in Cedar Park here, you're doing that. I think it's a lot different than the one-time mileage reimbursement. We're going to the conference, this is real easy to mark out.
That's my point.
But when you're doing it every day and you're going to several different things during the day, it makes it a lot more
It's
cumbersome.
travel versus day-to-day
But
business.
I
is what
get,
you mean.
and I will disagree with that for the factor I've been in business for many, many years. And part of my company reimbursing me, whether I had 3 meetings or 12 meetings, or I went to an airport, whatever it was, I was required to get reimbursed to report that. In one way, reporting actual mileage, or reporting, as he stated, I was given a car allowance. However, if I didn't spend all of my car allowance, they deducted it out of my paycheck, but I was still required to report the mileage I took. So I guess that's where I'm having, and I'm stuck on the mileage thing, is from a business aspect. I am required, and I think as a city council, they should be required to know where they've been, what miles they put in. Yes, it's cumbersome, but that's part of the duties you accepted also.
So I'm gonna ask an off-the-wall question. And I'm sorry, staff, I'm gonna ask this, but what's easier for y'all? And are we spending $100 and this is where I'm headed, basically, are we spending $100 to save $100, to reissue $100? And, because at a certain point, to Phoenix's point, I'm gonna pick $300 out of the air. I don't agree with that number, but it just makes it easier math. With all the cycling and are we saving ourselves some grief by just putting this to rest and saying, you're getting $300 a month, don't ever talk to us about mileage again. Don't put us in this precarious position of having to explain and justify, and above all, don't ever ask for using gas in your car with your card, I guess.
So if you're asking staff, and let me put that on the record, you're asking staff for this answer. My recommendation in response to that question would be car allowance.
Okay.
Over mileage reimbursement. It makes the process easier both for the council person. It also makes it easier on the staff side administratively to manage that process. Because it's a set amount every month. It's part of their payment, monthly paycheck.
It's budgeted,
It's budgeted, it's expensed every month evenly, and at the end of the year, we issue a W-2 to them that they will be responsible to pay income tax on.
Right.
So are you talking about the one where you're over or under, or are you talking about just flat?
Just flat rate.
Okay, so how are you gonna explain to the taxpayer then, because you've never tracked it, if the amount is reasonable or not?
I would just add that the taxpayers have to vote on this policy if it's approved by you and approved by council.
Yeah, and also think about, all you have to do is put any trip, so forget the day-to-day travel that they do. And if you know anything about what these guys are doing, which I know all of y'all do, they are riding around a lot here. But even if you nix that out of the equation entirely, okay, and then just look at the travel to Peachtree City was a plane, so that doesn't count. But I know that they've done multiple trips locally from Houston's the what do you call the council meetings that they go to every year?
Conference.
Yeah, that conference. If you look at just that one, you know, there's that trip alone for anybody's normal vehicle is not going to be cheap, right? You know, so $300, my point I'm getting at is $300 is, so I heard you said you didn't agree with it. That's fine. Let's put a number out there that does make sense to everybody. But I don't feel like that is so unreasonable is the point I'm getting at. So,
I don't personally like the perception when I do 30% of the approved compensation.
yeah.
That number pops to me.
And that makes sense. I do understand that argument, so.
I mean, I'm buttressing that by the fact of a trip to the airport, which, let's say I'm going to TML and it's in Dallas, so I'm gonna fly. Why you fly, I don't know, but let's just pretend for the minute I'm going to. 20 miles back and forth to the airport. Yeah, $20. Yeah, that's gonna add up quick for all of those things. Are we actually, in looking at an allowance, saving? And I think, to your point, we don't know that because we don't see the activity at this point.
It's not visible yet at this moment, you know, from our history or from our current.
Yeah, so it's hard to even wrap your head around that, because, I mean, I guess my picture of a city council person most of the time is not traveling a whole lot. So I view it, and I don't know if that's a fair estimate or not. I don't know enough about what they do to say that. And I want to be very cautious of not putting further burdens on council, because I already look at the 6-hour meetings till 1 a.m. That you take the salary, and I call it a salary, or the stipend, or whatever you want to call it, and you divide it by the number of hours, and you're starting to get, just in the meeting time, you're starting to get to a not very reasonable thing very quickly. Not to mention all the prep and reading for all of the meetings. So I want to be conscious of that, but I also, you know, in a perfect world, how much mileage is turned in for somebody that's, you know, driving for business, for city business, and what's that equation? I said the $300, which is, when you take the straight line budget and divide that, makes a lot of sense. That just seems high to me when you compare it to the total compensation. And I realize I'm talking in circles, so.
It only seems high to me when you're comparing it to the total compensation.
No.
It seems
But-
high, it does not seem
But
high
we
to me
went from
otherwise.
0 to this.
Right,
Yeah.
but not only that though is, I mean, we have other communities' information in front of us that do a lot of community outreach. They, maybe not as much as Kyle, I don't know them as I do Kyle. Our committee receives a stipend, our council, of $1,000 per month. Not per meeting, not zero compensation. They receive $1,000, okay? That is kind of, thank you for what you do. Thank you for the time, the meetings that you're attending, so on and so forth, okay? If they want to go check out another community to see what's going on in that community, that's kind of what I would consider part of the community service of taking that position. So I understand, trust me, I'm not a fan of recording my mileage either, but it was just something I had to do to get reimbursed to make that money. But we've got to give and take a little here, as they're receiving $1,000. Then we're going to put $300 more on there when San Marcos makes $1,450. And we're going to add in everything else in here. So I think looking at an overall number, we're not just looking at $300, we're looking at an overall number. Now, yours, once again, I'm leaning towards receiving the car allowance. However, I would like, for budget purposes, to have documentation of what miles are you doing. Should you reimburse, should you not, so that we can look at it for the future budget needs and say, okay, Brad didn't spend all of his, Jerry did. What can we average out? But also we can see transparency as a community of who is doing the mileage, who is doing the community outreach, who is visiting the other neighborhoods, who's doing that. Because if we're seeing a $0 or zero mileage, maybe we need to look at things differently.
Yeah, so I understand your point. Your point is the transparency I completely agree with. Doing this takes away the transparency, right? So in that regard, I agree with that statement. There is no transparency now for this, but I just think that the transparency of a $300,000 budget is very important. But when it's a $300 a month, something that is, I don't see the equivalent in
But
that part.
$300 adds up. It
Yeah,
adds
I
up. It all
agree.
adds up, and maybe I've just known too many people in government. They get all these allowances. They get meal allowances. They get. I mean, I worked with people that were with the one agency, and they got a meal allowance and they got a car allowance, and they didn't use either one. They're like, "This is great because I don't." And I'm like, "Well, great, yeah. Save all this paperwork, da da da. It's too much time." But I'm sitting there like, they're banking this. They're banking this. And again, back to who really does drive the most. I mean, you know, and go out and do all these things. I don't think I should reward somebody for not doing it, which is basically what happens when you hand them allowance. They don't have to go do this. And you have somebody over here that's going above the amount that maybe, you know, if they were reimbursed with mileage, they would get more money because they're traveling more miles. I just in my head though, I just know, I think the mayor probably goes the most. So to have his allowance be the same as somebody else who barely does anything,
Yeah,
that
but-
is wrong, wrong, wrong.
Right, but the alternative here, though, is a reimbursement that divides up to the same dollar. So are you suggesting that once they hit that allowance, that they continue to go over?
No, I would bump his up anyway, but.
I agree, bumping his up, his should be larger than the rest of the council. But not only that, that goes back to the tracking of the allowance and the mileage for seeing the transparency.
Right.
Seeing what's going on. And, I mean, there's nothing wrong with carpooling. You know? I mean, if you've got an allowance and you don't want to spend it, carpool. But I do think that we need to put the limitations, if that is what we look at on doing the car allowance, the mileage has to be reported.
So I don't know how we solve this, or we just make a note that, I mean, because we aren't deciding this policy anyway, like you said, this is, it was just some suggestions.
I would say, you know, you've debated the issues,
Right.
so it'd be appropriate to ask for a motion and a second and to make votes.
Regarding the amount for each
Because I
cost
thought
center?
we really couldn't, we weren't here really to talk about the budget, but I mean,
Right,
it's
but-
part of the
So
salary
if you were to make a
compensation.
motion, for example, to allow the mayor a $500 a month car vehicle allowance and the other council members a $200 or $300 a month, then you'd second, then you'd talk about that some more. And if you passed it and then it made it to the council and they approved it to go on the ballot, and then the voters passed it, then we would amend our budget to match that dollar amount.
So then there would be two votes, it seems. One is, should we give an allowance or leave it as it is, right? And then two, what would the dollar amount be?
It can be one motion.
You just do it all together.
Okay.
And then also the type of allowance, like whether it's the one that, the allowance where you do track your total miles by month, is that what you do? It's not odometer, is it? It's just total
It's
miles?
beginning and the end,
Oh,
odometer.
Oh, it is?
Can they submit a MapQuest or Google and determine what the mileage is from starting point to destination?
But
I did when I worked for Dell. Anytime I would travel with my vehicle, that's how I would do it.
And that way,
because
you
it
know,
would be
if
way
you
too
want to go
difficult.
visit your brother-in-law, that's, not included on the mileage reimbursement.
Can I give another staff perspective on that?
Sure.
Sure.
If they're having to, two things. One, if they're having to make that report, and we have staff that has to review it, and then decide if they owe us money or if we owe them money. In 1 month, they may owe us money, the next month we may owe them money. So then the money's going back and forth, and we're spending staff time trying to figure that out. So I'm gonna just second Pervez's comment that from a staff perspective, it's just a lot easier to have that flat.
Right, and which then, the only sympathetic part of this that I have toward the prevailing comments that were made is that it takes out transparency. But from my perspective, it obviously makes things much easier from my perspective. That's what I would, I mean, it's such a small amount. That's my view. I know you differ on that.
I don't think it's small, that's why.
It all adds up.
Yeah, but I'm talking about small in regards to how much it costs to travel. That's the point I'm making. If you're using your car, that $300 a month will be gone in no time flat. That's the point I'm making, if you're doing any actual travel.
I guess what I'm looking at is overall, the proposal is, this is one line of multiple things that are gonna have to be audited.
Right.
So it's not, the only thing being audited is mileage, that's a small portion of it. So if we look at overall, the proposal has a lot of auditing in it, which there is other parts that I think we could assist possibly the city staff in auditing ideas. But, so I'm not okay with the $300 is such a small amount for work, when obviously somebody's already gonna have to audit everything as it is.
Well, again, my contention of it's a small amount is not in relation to their salary, because I agree it's not a small amount in that regard. It's a large amount. In that case, it's 30%. So it is a large amount in that regard. It's a small amount. If we're actually asking them to use their vehicle, and they do, that $300 is barely enough to get them to do anything on an active basis, is the point I'm making.
So I'd like to make a question about law or rule of unintentional consequences here. Right now, I have a conference in Dallas. I'm getting paid mileage. How does this impact a flat reimbursement if I decide, okay, since I'm not going to get paid mileage, or I'm not going to get my gas tank filled up, I'm just going to say, city, you need to provide me transportation to Dallas for that conference, whereas, I don't know, if it's in the lower 48 states, I'll drive there instead of getting on an airplane. How does that impact here? Are we basically taking from one bucket and going and detouring people to increase the travel expenses for things that before they would have just hopped in a car and maybe not done mileage? I'm just throwing that out there, like, what's the fence posts on this that say, if you go to Dallas, it's still on your dime if you drive? But is that 75-mile buffer that I saw in that policy?
Yeah, I don't think, what the policy you've seen is staff policy. It's not a
Okay.
council policy. And that policy really needs to be updated. It's like 10 or 12 years old. But if there's a conference in Dallas and if we had a car and they wanted to take it and there's other people going, there's staff going, sure, they could do that. But we don't have a lot of extra cars laying around, so. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios that you guys can debate back and forth, and you know, this is something new to us too. We've never considered this type of allowances or compensation for councils, and that's why we need you guys.
Well, it's a fun topic to debate, you can see, right? Well, so why don't we just ask ourselves the question, should it be an allowance, or, an allowance, or should it continue to be the means of tracking it via mileage? Why don't we get that out of the way, right?
I think the tracking of a mileage needs to be imposed. We need to make, there's got to be more transparency. And if it's an allowance, we don't know how much they're spending on fuel or where they're actually traveling to, or they're extending their travel. With the mileage reimbursement, I believe there's a better tracking and more transparency.
So Brandy, you obviously feel the same,
I agree.
and Rose, you feel the same.
Okay, I'm gonna make a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
That work?
Yep.
I'm gonna make a motion to change the budget with the mileage amount of 70, and I make a motion to change it to mileage of, 23,000. I would like to see 5,000 limit go to the mayor, and the remaining 18,000 get divided up 6 ways to 3,000 per council member, and I still think it should be mileage reporting, and have it done this way, you know. Consider looking at it and changing it in a year after you already know who's driving where, and, you know, and how many miles everybody's using. So I make a motion.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
So what you're proposing is essentially we go with a mileage reimbursement
Correct.
Method of reimbursing vehicle expenses.
Right.
The dollars, I don't see any problems with those, but I know those will probably be tweaked by council.
And just remember, the council approves budget.
Yeah.
So, and then what I'm changing is that I'm giving the mayor 5 and everybody else is, I'm getting 3.
Okay. So your motion is to keep it as tracking the miles. That's the motion, yeah.
And that's not something that I think would be forwarded to the voters.
Right. So if we go with this, then it doesn't change
It's
what
just a
needs.
recommendation to council for their consideration of the
Right.
budget.
Right.
Can we, one more clarification, with that, would remove any credit card charges of gasoline, filling the tank, so on and so forth?
Right. No auto expenses at all, because
That covers
in
the
this,
wear and tear
you know,
and stuff.
with the IRS rate or that they're following it, that includes everything.
Yeah, it's wear and tear and everything.
I second the motion.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And all those,
Nay, but I realize where I'm at, so it's all good.
okay, motion passed to recommend change to the budget for the mileage reimbursement. Okay, I think, next thing.
Sorry, so are you voting,
Against.
okay, thank you.
Not that it matters, I mean, it just,
Well, you go on record for your,
yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
please. Oh, quick question, is there a what's the credit card limit per month, or credit card limit per month?
$5,000 for
5,000.
every single one of them.
Okay,
Is equal for,
okay, so how do you feel that's going, and you think that's reasonable?
that's been working fine.
Okay,
Everybody has been within their limits.
okay. Because it was my understanding it was lower and it was upped recently.
Initially, when we first introduced the city credit cards for council, it was set at a lower rate. I just can't remember off the top of my head whether it was $1,500 or $2,500. And then a little later, city manager requested that be increased to $5,000.
Okay.
It's not a budget of 5,000, it's obviously just a.
Just a
it's
credit
yeah,
limit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the other thing that I think I've been asked to talk about was the phones reimbursements. So there's another way of looking at that. I mean, I think to me, the office expense is a pretty hefty amount. So I don't know if something can be done considering, you know, looking at cost to operate an office, cost to operate, you know, a phone or whatever. So if you want any discussion, again, a phone allowance would be the same thing. It would be a taxable deal. So, otherwise, I don't know how else you'd handle phone.
There's two ways you could typically handle it. One is to allow for a stipend to use your own personal phone. The other is that the city would issue a phone.
That's a mess.
Staff would prefer a stipend.
Mhm.
But right now, it's not in the budget at all though, right? Wireless?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, so there's nothing here for wireless. For
No,
phones.
but what I would probably propose is tweaks office expense and input.
Just remember, we can, that's a recommendation I think would have to go to the voters.
To change adding.
Although I'm not sure. But we can amend that budget if that's your recommendation, the council approves it.
Or again, what I'm saying, in your thought process, you tell them, okay, office supplies are this, office, you know.
Yeah, but you're proposing
Well, I'm just
17,000.
saying, in your own mind, what you can spend money on, I mean,
There's a difference between, in my mind, Perez, correct me if I'm wrong, from our perspective. There's a difference between the reimbursement for using your own phone for business and office supplies. Office supplies are consumable, and
so you wouldn't, if somebody wanted a new cell phone, or, for example, they wouldn't be able to turn that as a.
right, if you were gonna, the equivalent to office supplies for that would be that you would get a stipend on your paycheck
Right.
for your office supplies.
Right.
And then you wouldn't be able to,
I guess I was just looking at the overall budget where I
Yeah.
think the office supplies is pretty high per
Just-
person. It's 3,000 a person. So I was just saying, well, maybe you don't give them as much for office supplies and you give them a phone allowance. That's all. I'm just, as far as total numbers, that's all.
Is anybody expensing phone expenses right now?
no.
But they are computer hardware, I see.
Mayor and council are using their personal phones at this
Okay.
time.
But what about computer hardware? What's that? I see that's a pretty large, it's $17,500 for
But it's
computer
not there
hardware.
anymore, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it got removed? I'm seeing it as
Did I
22.
not?
So-
It was 8,000, looks like current year, estimated, 17,500.
So contrary to what you see before you, we're largely a paperless operation now. And we distribute agendas digitally, and almost everything we do is paperless, but some council members do like to have paper agendas, so they'll print the agenda and all the backup.
Well, that makes sense. Office supplies, what you
Right,
referenced.
so that's for them, that's paper, toner,
Yeah.
everything that goes along with it. That's just an example.
Computer hardware?
Computer hardware is, a lot of them have city-issued laptops or iPads that they're able to use at the meetings, and they're, as they're at home reviewing agendas, they use a city-issued piece of equipment to be able to do that. And a lot of them prefer that because if something happens and there's an open records request, they don't have to use their own personal equipment for city business.
Good.
So they're not required to use their own personal
They're
computers?
not required to use their.
So the only thing they're required to use personally is their own phone, the phone.
So I have a dumb question. Does the city have a VoIP telephone system?
Yes.
So,
Central,
Right now,
It-
it's Central.
so if, I assume they're using a Microsoft Office suite license, why aren't y'all just buying them a VoIP license and giving them a city-provided phone number that can be used via an app then it becomes,
On the computer too.
yeah, on the computer, on the laptop, then y'all control the number. It's always District 7 is,
I know we did that with their emails.
I mean, from a cost perspective, that would be much better. Plus y'all would retain control of the number.
How would it be better though? There's no cost for cellular right now on this.
I know, but
So it's transparency is what you're getting at, but what does it cost?
It's transparent and it's a negligible technology cost that actually makes everything more secure and brings it more under the auspices of the city. They're already providing hardware. I mean, then it becomes you're accessing a website to get your phone call, is my point.
Yeah, and they can do that on their city-issued equipment if we were to give them the phone license. Phone license does cost us money to a point, right?
I'm not sure, I'll have to ask Matt, that's
Yeah.
outside my.
Yeah, no,
So you
it-
say that instead of saying, where somebody said, I would like a phone allowance or an expectation that I should have one, you're saying, well, if you want that, this is what we're gonna do instead.
And nobody's proposed it here on this.
I was personally asked.
No,
Yeah.
Oh, I see, I got you.
I'm just throwing that out as if we're going,
If we could bring it up.
if we're gonna do that, we have technology at the city that already kind of supplies that. And
But they
quite
have to have-
frankly,
They have to have a cell phone though for that. Well, or the
No,
city
you can use your
issue.
computer.
yeah, you can use your computer, you can use your cell phone.
But as they're
And-
driving, they're
Yeah.
not going to do that.
Well, actually, a Vonage app or some other app will actually integrate just like your cell phone.
Correct, which requires you to have a phone. So I think the point that she's making was a cell phone, right? So,
Well,
Well,
I I guess you're gonna tell me one person that probably is on the council that doesn't have a cell.
I agree with you on
Okay,
that.
so
I'm not
we'll just-
proposing that we put a phone in
Well,
there.
then-
I'm not proposing that, so.
In a transparency thing too, perspective too, if the phone number is owned by the city, the records are retained at the city. So, and I, as a council member, don't have to give out my private number. There's a city mechanism for doing that. I'm just throwing that out there.
No, that's a good,
I mean,
Yeah, and, you know, that's something we can look into, but I think the question is the technology that they use to get, because like on this is my personal phone. My office, this is also my desk phone and my personal phone.
yeah,
So I think most people work that way that have that type of system. And so if it were me, and I don't, but I prefer a stipend to use my personal phone for that, so I don't have to carry two phones around. Because I've done that before, and it's not
right.
a good time.
but at this point, you're already given, the hardware argument's already gone because you provided them a city-owned hardware.
Yeah, but if you're somewhere and you get a work phone call, do you want to have to open up your laptop to answer it?
Right, but see, and that's where the can of worms that you're adding
Yeah.
into this is that exact point. So that's exactly what my point is that right now, they're using their own cell phones, and I don't believe, or at least on this budget, sounds to me like somebody asked you to introduce it. On this budget, there's nothing to introduce the cost of a phone into this, right?
Right,
And-
the
and-
common-
And for you to add in the cost of adding in, say, Ring Central into this, then would imply that they have the city hardware to do it. And if they're sitting in their office, they do. But most of us would want it on our phone. So it's a completely different cost. It's not, yeah, never mind, I don't know where.
No, it's,
Yeah.
I just bring it up as are we utilizing everything the city is already paying for?
You know,
I guess I'm just bringing it up because if we do a phone allowance, it's part of the compensation
Yeah.
that we're talking about. So we don't wanna have that come up later and then we've already done this. So I guess we could just decide if, you know, we feel strongly that we want to add a phone allowance. If we don't, then we don't. And then if we don't, then you've put out there that there's other ways that they can resolve that if it's somebody that really felt strongly about.
I feel,
Anybody can make a motion anytime.
I motion to not add a phone allowance.
second that. I don't think there's a reason to add phone calls personally.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those that not in favor say nay.
it's the hardest part of parliamentary procedure.
Motion.
You're doing great.
Motion
Yes,
passed to not add a phone allowance. So really, anything else that we need to discuss as far as compensation goes?
I just wanted to have a discussion about compensation is I understand this is a different policy, but just kind of looking through things is, I don't know, it looks like there's a lot of the city secretary or city staff asking for things. I would like to see in here, like a deadline given to the council is like, you have to have your receipts turned in by the 25th instead of credit card statement comes in and now we're chasing everything down kind of situation. For reimbursements, is it seems like there was a lot of after work that was done, and I know that there's a lot of clarity that's coming to it, but just reading through different things, I don't know if that's an option.
There
What's
was,
the
there
option?
was 3 days, and there was some deadlines put in here, right?
Yeah.
Are you looking at the draft credit card
Yes,
policy?
and that's after the fact though, is what I was seeing is once the bill was received, it was dispersed out.
The
Yeah,
statement, you mean, the
Just
statement?
get the statement out in 3 days after the statements come
Well,
out, right? And
yeah,
then,
what we don't want is a box full of receipts ahead of the statement, because it might be for multiple statements. So as statements come in, we send the statements out to the individual council members. They review the statement, and then they submit the invoices, the receipts, itemized detailed receipts that go with each individual transaction on that particular statement. Because sometimes the cutoff is such that the receipts they may have given us in advance perhaps belongs to the next statement. So we don't want to be responsible for that, and we don't want to be responsible for sorting their shoebox of receipts. So they look through their statements, they give us the statements in order of the activities, and then we go from there.
And I guess what I'm looking at is like an Excel doc that basically ate one dinner or something like that and the total on it, so that you can match it up to the statement, and then receipts being provided in that electronically, because we're
Sure.
a lot of paperless, is at least having that Excel doc prior, with everything rounded into it, details, so that people are not, because it seemed like there was a lot of after-the-fact work
Right.
being done.
Well, not only that, I noticed, I looked through all the credit card statements myself, and I didn't see half of the ability to count for what you just said is not there. Not on those statements that I saw. You know, receipts that actually match each of these expenses.
Hence the policy.
No, I understand. I'm with you. The transparency
Yeah.
is what I think you're hitting at, you know. It's not transparent at this particular moment.
And for checks and balances, just from an accounting standpoint, is if you've got one that says 3226, you can go, oh, here's the receipt saved as 3226.
Some way, some
kind of-
accountability method, I agree with you,
Right.
because when I looked through it, I just, my head was swimming. You know, it was a lot of data, it wasn't easy to match, the receipts weren't all there, there definitely wasn't descriptions of who was at dinner, as an example. There's definitely I don't envy anybody who's going through those
And-
receipts, for sure.
In reality, it's a real simple process. You collect your receipts, when you get the statement from the bank, you just make sure that those costs reflect those receipts, and that's what you submit to finance for payment. If there's anything that came afterwards, you save those until the following month. It's
But-
a real simple
Yeah,
process.
but how do we, I guess my question to these statements is how do we enforce that? Because if they've got a credit card, they go swipe it. He says, you've got to do this or I'm not paying you, really? It's on their card, right? So they're going to pay it. It's eventually going to be paid, right?
If he's
Do
got
you
that
then-
written up.
And then we deduct it from their paycheck.
So you deduct it? Is
Yeah,
that?
it's in the
He's got
policy.
it,
Yeah.
he's got it in
Okay,
here.
got it,
Good job.
got it.
Um,
It is, but it's also after attempts, and what I was looking at is there's interest that's being accrued during that time. If they have certain attempts before either the credit card's turned off and/or doing that, and that's why I guess I'm looking at, I would like to see a before fact besides an after the fact, because it shouldn't be up to the city staff to chase council down for receipts. It should be readily available, and from a business aspect, I every day have to go in and figure out my finances. I have to scan my receipts. I take a picture with my phone, another phone use. But scan it on my phone. I save it in a folder on my computer. The 28th of every month, I save it in July expenses and hit send on it. You know, something like that. So I'm just trying to, from a cost perspective, looking how can we make it efficient for you guys to manage the credit cards? Because there is a lot of, wait, what was that for?
I'd just like to add the part, remind that the council is a judge of its members, and from a staff perspective, we don't want to be put in the position of turning council members' credit cards off. So-
Right, that's
Well,
exactly what I
But
said to begin with,
That's what I think, what we'd like to give you the authority to do is
yeah. And you
to,
can't, we're not, but we don't have that authority, do we?
this is also what's discussed in here, though.
The people who would give them the authority is the council.
Right, which they can
Right.
approve the policy and say this is what we're gonna adhere to. You know, I just think it says in here, if you don't follow the policy, your card's gonna be turned off. I don't think I need, I don't care if you're a council member or not, you didn't follow the policy, I'm turning your card off. You know, okay, fine, change the agreement that they sign when they get their credit card that says, I understand my card can be turned off at any time, which I think the agreement probably says something from what I was told. The actual agreement that you sign, that I always sign, says if I don't follow the policy, my card is gonna be turned off and I lose my privileges And anything that I don't turn a receipt in for, and I don't turn it in timely, whether I got an excuse for whatever, if I don't turn it in timely, I owe you the money back. And I sign it, and I'm a council member and I signed it, I have to follow the rules.
Well,
Well, you were
I
gonna
was
say
gonna,
something.
sorry.
I know you're,
Can I speak first? 'Cause
Sure,
I
go
might
ahead.
address what you're, I agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, you say you're gonna follow this policy. I worry about the city manager having to go and have that as a contentious issue in shutting off one person. I honestly think that council themselves should have to review these as a body or a whole to alleviate that from the city manager.
It's a council within the council.
So, I don't know, I'm struggling with the mechanism to do that. I mentioned an expense committee earlier, but, you know, whether that becomes a standing agenda item as directed by council of review of monthly expenses, where it has to be brought up for a vote, and then that's the trigger to do exactly what you're talking about. Either return the funds, but kind of create a wall between staff, because they're implementing it. And then it's not staff member A turning it off, it's the council has turned it off and they become a judge of their own.
Yep. I agree with that.
And puts all of council necessary to call out that. So I don't know if that overcomplicates the situation or
No,
not.
no. I mean, you have a very good point. And we don't want to be the judges, and we certainly don't want to be in that awkward position between city council and staff relationship. So I've tried to address that. If you look on page 45,
right,
and if you look on item number 13, because if this policy is to be adopted, it'll be adopted by ordinance, by city council by vote. So city council is by vote adopting this ordinance, and in this ordinance, they're directing the city manager and staff what happens when a council member does not comply. So it gives the staff the authorization.
right.
Do you feel that gives you enough
Yes.
separation?
Yes.
I'm trying to advocate for keeping that wall, because.
Yes, I think this creates and helps create that wall between
Okay.
council and staff.
Because when I read this, because I did read it and I saw it, and my question became, is it a big enough wall?
I think it does, but we can beef it up.
I want to give city staff, my goal is to make it a transparent environment where things can be called. And you're absolutely right. Codifying it here makes it essentially something that would end up going to an ethics committee if it was violated, which is good. That is strong. But does it make it strong enough to where council is accountable each month to saying, hey, here's what it is? We're over on budget, because I'm still, with a credit card especially, you're paying that bill regardless, so you're gonna go over your budget.
And it's after the fact.
And it's after the fact. That's where I think I'm having a problem wrapping my head around that what's that mechanism to trigger that budget conversation to say, because there's not a 10%, you're 10% under budget, watch out. There's no, I guess, legal remedy that says at 10% under budget, you have to have that conversation. It's only when you violated the budget, you have to have that conversation. I don't envy the city in doing budget conversations, because it is so precarious doing budgeting. I've done it for almost 20 years, and it's never right. It's right the day it's created, and then
it changes.
Then it changes.
Well, perhaps the council can have their own update meeting every once in a while. Like, they all have their budget, they can review the budget. They didn't really have a budget by cost center before, but now, they and themselves as a group have the ability to look at the budget and see if somebody's going over or not, and they can discuss that. And I do believe that the majority of the people on the council are interested in in responsible spending. I mean, I think that they have not been happy with some of the things that have happened. So I think they are asking for this, so I just think I think this is, I think this will solve a lot of the problems and give some people feel like they're being backed up on the actions that they need to take.
I think having some form of action, some form of teeth is important.
So the only thing I want to bring up that was kind of missing was, in spite of, we have all the staff looking at this and people do the best they can do, and you have an audit, and the audit finds something. So I would like to know what is the what can be done. The audit finds that somebody violated the policy, it went untraced or whatever. And, you know, it's just like anything, like even when a company gets audited and you find out the person, your bookkeeper's been stealing from you, what do you do? So I would like to know if anybody is interested in talking about what do you do if there's an audit and you find out that somebody did not remit receipts for adequate receipts for things, and they should not have been reimbursed, or they should not, the credit card charges, they have credit card charges that are under the definition here of unallowed, or, let's see, what was the other one? There's two types of, basically, well, unallowed or the kind that don't have the proper receipts. If that happens later, what can be done then? Or you just say, oh, well.
That's where I'm pushing for the turn-in previously, because I think that does avoid the audits, is if you're turning in your receipts, and you're responsible for itemizing basically that statement yourself, before you have to just answer for what's on the credit card, you're taking responsibility for what you spent, and keeping it within a timely manner, is my thoughts. I honestly don't know that there's anything you can do after the fact, because most audits are 6 months later. How are we gonna find that bill or that receipt?
Well, I'm just saying, let's say there's an audit and there's a lack of receipts, because technically then you go to the IRS, and the IRS audits you for some reason. And this is different because this is a government entity, but basically your expense is disallowed. You don't have a receipt, it's not a legit expense, and then the city's in trouble for not having legit expenses.
So are you
Well, here-
proposing, well,
I would like
page
to know.
41 on line 8, I think it's 8, that it's one of these, the member is required in personal check to reimburse.
That's exactly what I'm talking
Okay.
about, and I guess I'm bringing it up now because I think it's timely. All this that we're doing right here, the policy existed. It wasn't because there wasn't a policy. There is a policy. Everybody knows what's a business expense, what's not a business expense. This is just further clarification.
Is there a
Because
policy?
people are,
Is there currently a policy?
it's the agreement that they sign when they get their credit card. It's pretty clear about, you don't turn in personal expenses.
No, I
But it
understand,
also
but you're-
says they have so many days to turn the receipts in, right?
There is an existing policy, it's in your handout, it's on page 52.
Yes.
So that page
there-
52 is the policy, or is it 52, 53, 54?
It's a start.
Yes.
55,
It's
okay.
all of this, so there is a policy.
It's embedded in the city's personnel policy, Article 13, which starts on 52.
And but there's also, when you sign the credit card, it says, my understanding is you agree that you're gonna return your receipts in within 10 days, 5 days, I don't remember what it is.
I don't remember off the top.
Document. But I'm saying, these things are in place. we're clarifying what's already in place, because some people seem to have problem with, specifically, what's a business expense, or again, we need some teeth in this because people were making charges and not turning receipts in. So I'm saying is we are clarifying something that already existed, and so why I'm bringing it up is, you get audited and you find out that people didn't adhere to the policy, I would like to know, we need to write in this policy what happens if it's a result of an audit, or does it just not matter? Because to me, it should be the same. Am I making sense?
Isn't there an ongoing audit right now?
Council authorized an expenditure to have a forensic audit done. Council has let the staff credit cards.
That's what I thought.
Per Bez, regardless of when it's determined audit or, you know, lack of receipt or whatever, if they have violated this policy, the condition is that they're gonna lose their credit card.
That's correct.
So that's, you know, it's regardless if it's found in the audit or if it's found.
So the teeth are there.
But we also talked about reimbursing. There's a thing in here about reimbursing, right, and a check back for
I
things.
just want to point also, this is a draft policy, has not been approved by council.
Right.
No, and I'm hearing what you're saying, because the policy is in here for if they don't turn in the receipts when the credit card statement comes out, so on and so forth. So I think Rose is alluding to is, this one is great, but we would like to see at the very end also, if you're audited, if it's 6 months
If
now.
something slips
Right.
through.
Right.
Not just your credit cards turned off, but your credit cards turned off and you are required to reimburse, kind of statement.
Well, and
Because just something slips through doesn't, to me, mean you're
Free.
free. And it things may slip through, but, then it shouldn't be at the cost of the taxpayers either.
so when someone owes the city money, city staff, and I'm not saying this is, I'm using city staff because they're the most, there's enough of them, but even Joe Citizen, I need to reimburse the city for something. Is there an AR invoice created to create a paper trail, or is it, hey Brad, go cut us a check for $1,000, please?
If it's an external entity, yes, there is an AR created.
Okay.
However, if it's an employee, then we work out with the employee and
Sure.
their supervisor to settle up.
Could we, instead of having I would suggest instead of 8 deducting from the compensation paycheck, for council, it'd be an AR invoices issued by the city for those set amounts. That way it's actually a receivable and not an agreement. Unless that takes us down a path we don't want to go, unintended consequences.
Right.
Because to me, at $1,000, if you have a $5,000 limit and you have $1,000 payment, there's inequity there. So I'll leave that question open.
So when I was drafting this policy, actually I was on vacation. So
That's why he does for fun. The rest of us go fishing.
So I was trying to think through all the possibilities and combination of occurrences that might occur. So when I was thinking about that exact situation, how I would like to see it addressed from a city staff perspective, if I created an AR for amounts outstanding or a receipt that is unresolved or unsettled, then staff is put back in that same predicament, chasing the
Okay.
council member for
Fair.
receipts to settle up. But if I take it out of the paycheck, I'm done, it's settled.
Okay, no, fair, that's a totally fair answer, and
But
I'm trying to get back to your point.
what if there's no
What's that
paycheck
clock
anymore
clock?
then?
Okay, so what I haven't, as you were discussing, I was thinking, okay, if this council person's term ends and they have a statement coming the following month and they do not cooperate and do not turn in receipts, then what steps can we take?
Right,
This policy, this draft policy does not have
right.
that yet.
So if we could just add that. And that would take care of an audit too
But
later.
what kind of teeth would we have? When again, they're the ones that's having to create this. We're making a proposal to them. What kind of teeth could you put in there that says, and once you're no longer in office, I'm gonna go bank draft you? What am I, you have to give me your bank draft? What are we gonna do to get something
Well,
from them
That's
afterward?
at the point where maybe you could do an AR invoice at that point.
What
That's
is an
the last
AR, what is
resort.
AR invoice stand for?
Just send you an
So,
invoice.
Just
say,
send an invoice,
I'm
okay,
gonna
but then it
send
would
you a
go
bill.
into, but then it would go into collections, I guess,
Yes.
at that
Yes.
point? I
Yes.
got you.
We do turn AR to collection.
So that's a teeth, so there's some teeth, there's some
Yeah,
teeth at that point, yeah.
And back to that's and maybe you put that in the policy that you're taking to city council to accept, saying, and above all else, at the tail end of this process, if all these remedies don't work.
So, from a staff perspective, we're not taking anything back to the council. If this committee is
I
gonna make that
apologize.
recommendation, you guys need to make a motion, second it, and vote on it, and that's what
Right.
goes back to council.
Fair enough, sorry.
Well, he's just talking about, so is this policy been approved already by the council?
No.
Okay, so we're just talking about changing it before you,
Yes.
before
Yeah.
you take it to them.
Correct.
Hey,
Just doing some edit.
Right,
Some non-vacation edit.
Yeah,
otherwise he's gonna bill us for it.
So, I'd also add that it sounds like you guys have accomplished the compensation part of your charge.
right.
Right.
And so if that's all buttoned up, if you guys are really gonna take a hard look at this policy, that's a pretty extensive policy, I don't know that's gonna happen tonight.
Well, I went through it, I just had a couple, I didn't know if I had a few little questions, but I just talked to you about them or whatever, I don't know that I have to. I mean, we're not approving or disapproving this either, this is your, we were just using this as a,
No, I think if we look at the way this is actually being done, he gave us this as a guideline.
Right.
For us to agree on, to give to them, right? If I'm not mistaken, right?
Actually, we gave it to you as
A reference.
part of your backup to look at the type of
Right, as a
expenses
reference,
council incurs.
So
I don't know-
maybe
I don't-
we
we
should,
don't have any say really over
And I don't
this.
know for a fact that part of your charge is to make a recommendation
Right. We're
on
just-
that policy. I don't know that you can't, it's up to you, however you want to do it. But it all goes back to the council, and the council will have
Right.
The
to debate
final
it and
say.
vote on it. This doesn't go to the voters. The only
This
thing
part
goes
doesn't go to the voters?
Is the compensation.
yeah, got it.
Because the council is the policy-making board of the city.
They're the,
So they would review your recommendations as their appointed board to review that.
right.
And then they would debate it, and anything that gets changed, they would vote on it, they would approve the policy.
Right, so this is not part of
No.
the budget, of course.
No.
Right, so
We're-
I don't know if you want to spend some more time looking through that, and looking for recommendations you want to make and have another meeting, because you're not under a timeline to do that. But do whatever you want to do.
Right, but as it relates to the things that we had to do from the
And-
timeline's perspective.
Right, from your
we've
charge,
essentially already
as a
covered it.
compensation committee, your charge was to make recommendations to the
Right.
council for their consideration regarding their compensation to pass on to the voters on the November ballot. And you are on the agenda for Tuesday to discuss your recommendations or not, whatever. We'll kind of go over your process, what you talked about, what you decided, what you're asking to bring to the voters or not.
So you're saying you need to be at the meeting?
Yes. And all of you to be at the meeting, you know.
Tuesday.
Because although it's a short amount of time, you've obviously been doing a lot of work.
That's next Tuesday, obviously.
This coming Tuesday.
That's coming Tuesday, yeah.
So I just recap what we did here, or do I
Yeah,
have to
you,
say?
I would just, my recommendation would be to recap what you talked about, what you considered, what motions were made, and what votes you took, and what your final recommendation is.
Do we need to seek permission to continue on the conversation that is relevant but not necessarily explicit in their instructions?
In other words.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay,
I'll have to go back and look and see what your specific charge was from them, what the charter says.
Well, the
what-
charter is-
because the charter is just about their compensation. I don't know if there's an
No,
official part.
actually, that's not true. The charter does include more than that.
Does it?
Yeah. So down at the bottom, it says, members of the council shall be entitled to reimbursement for all necessary proof. There shall be provided in each annual budget amount for expenses the mayor of each council. The city council ordinance shall provide a method for determining what expenses are reimbursable and which ones are met to receive
Okay,
reimbursement.
so you're right.
So this gives us the means to say, we want to have this conversation.
So you can continue on,
Right.
at later dates, but you're
It's not
charged-
part of this one.
Yeah, I don't believe the voters would vote on that.
I would recommend that I mean, obviously, you guys, we're the majority
Make
here.
a motion.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Well,
Well, let me see.
I think that it's worth at least having a follow-up meeting to debate that part, those
You mean
final
to
questions.
review this
Yeah.
part?
The
Not,
final-
nothing else?
Nothing
We're
else.
not gonna go over the
Yeah.
budget or nothing, we're just gonna go over
The policy itself.
do you have any,
Let me just make sure I'm not telling you wrong.
Buzz, are you good with that? Would you like that, more input or not?
Sure, more input is better.
Well, I mean,
And I know y'all have already voted on the compensations, but before we adjourn, I would like to address this committee on compensation for council, for whatever it's worth. So after Jerry gets done, I'd like to, if y'all are okay with that. Jerry's going, oh my God, what is he gonna say?
We're all,
Updated.
Well, who's in line after you?
You still want to address?
yeah, are you sure about this?
well, I just want to say, Perez, it's a well-written policy, very detailed, the do's and don'ts. This is, I think, it was much needed. This will give direction to all the elected officials of, what they can do and the proper procedure for submitting receipts. And so, thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
Do you, so normally, not normally, I guess, most of the time that I've seen them, it's not as detailed. What's listed as not allowed, like some of the specific things you said aren't allowed, then made, wondered if, okay, are these things that have been allowed, or why do they have to specifically be mentioned? Because normally you just say no entertainment, no entertainment, no, we had to list ball games, hot air balloon thingies
Yeah,
and
under-
all this specifically. Now, I do see where you have in there, not, may include other things, so you can encompass things that aren't specifically, because I could just see somebody going, well, since you have such an extensive list, you did happen to mention this is on the list. But I guess I was wondering, what drove you to have to list so many specific exceptions?
Okay, so it's a fair question. So if you would visualize, I'm on vacation in my shorts in a rented Airbnb, relaxed with a couple of adult beverages.
He
So-
did say shorts, it's all good.
Yeah, it's okay, Jerry. So I'm thinking, if I'm going to go to the extent of giving detailed guidance for staff as well as elected officials, then perhaps I should also clearly identify the do's and don'ts.
Okay.
So that's what I was thinking when I was preparing this list. And you'll see the list is pretty thorough. I think it's got I started out
40 some
first,
items.
right, I started out first with ABCs, then I ran out of alphabets, so I went back and changed it to the numbers. I wanted to make sure that it's clear for staff to implement this policy, so
Okay,
that's basically the reason.
okay. Make it more black and white.
Right, nothing in particular that
Well,
brought me to.
I think the thing I like the most about it is one of the things that we've discussed ad nauseum here was that there has to be some form of teeth, right? Because as you said, the council is their own judge, if you will, right? So this isn't you judging the council, this is something that the council passed themselves.
Right.
You know, so it gives them the teeth, gives you the teeth, sorry. And I said the teeth, to then not cause a rift between.
Right, and council, this is just a draft. Council, if they see fit, they can
Add more teeth.
add to it or delete
Or
some of
remove
it,
some
make
of
it
the
as
teeth, yeah.
flexible as they would like to make it.
Yep.
So reading this charter section on compensation, it says changes to council's salary shall only be considered once every 3 years and shall be considered only after recommendation is made by a council-appointed committee. Meetings of the committee shall be in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. And it says salary adjustment approved in accordance with this section shall be included in the proposed budget for the subsequent fiscal year. So that would be So it just references salary. Then it goes on to say the council is entitled to be reimbursed for expenses, but that's not part of our salary.
Right.
So your recommendation would be regarding salary. So I don't know that, and this doesn't say the committee does anything in relation to reimbursements.
Or setting policy for that, right?
So I have a clarification question. The city council, second to last sentence, city council by ordinance shall provide a method of determining what expenses are reimbursable and what requirements are met. What ordinance is that currently?
I don't think we have one.
That would be budget by default.
Okay, and that's what I
Right.
I served on charter many years ago, and that's what I remember that discussion being.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, and I think what we're lacking is part of that ordinance is a definition of who determines what the proper expenses are. And you guys can make those recommendations for the council to consider, and then they can vet them and vote on them.
Okay.
IRS.
Well, I think putting the power in the members' hands against the members is, in other words, some sort of committee, like you had suggested, is probably one of the best teeth, because it gives every one of the members the ability to say, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be allowed to do this, right? That sort of thing.
Really, was there anything that any of you really wanted to change that is in here? I mean,
No, I
really,
wanted to
do we
give you
need-
the opportunity. You said you had some questions or whatnot.
Well, I
so-
just had a few things, but I just thought maybe I would just email
Sure.
you directly with them. It wasn't anything like major.
I don't myself, so.
I mean, part of your report could be that, you spend some time looking through this policy, and you might volunteer the committee to continue on to review it and come back with a recommendation.
And
It'd
then
be
they
up to
would
the
give-
coun-
And then they would give the ability to do that or not,
Yeah.
yeah. So you feel the need to? I mean, it's up to you
I
guys.
don't know,
no?
if you guys really don't have anything else that you specifically want to change in this. The only thing, like I said, that we talked about before was adding maybe the thing about what happens with an audit or a post, that they're gone, add something to that. That'd be a suggestion. Other than that.
I think the post, once they're gone, that one's a big one, because right now there is nothing that can happen once they're gone, right? But you create an AR, as you said.
Yeah.
It gives you the means to be able to bill them for what because I'm quitting, I know it, let me go spend something, you know what I'm saying, that sort of
No, I
thing.
think the AR idea is a great one, and I'm gonna include that in the draft.
So, as a body, I believe we actually should take this up in this particular, to make that recommendation, or I would be putting that recommendation in there personally. So that the committee says, we feel, and the council gets to choose to accept it or
You can make
toss
a
it.
motion to that effect.
And then what, Tuesday, bring it up? Or
Right.
we bring it up Tuesday that,
Yeah.
So in other words, we make a motion that says we should tell them Tuesday that,
No, we can make a motion to essentially say, we feel this should be added to the policy. To have,
but didn't you say that we don't have means to do that based on the
But
city
council
charter?
could
Well, I would think.
decide not to go with it.
motion would be that you bring forward a recommendation to the council for their consideration.
That we further review.
That we further review it. That's the, that's
So
what they're saying.
that's what I'm feeling is like, and I'll make a motion, because it
Okay.
sounds like what we need to do, is that Tuesday, we bring forth to the council as a committee, we would like to review, the policy that's being put forth and make recommendations to the council to include maybe some clarification and other facts, if the council would give us that opportunity.
Okay, great. Second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Any nays?
But just to clarify, the first part of your report is going to go over the salary considerations that y'all went through.
Right.
And I guess you guys didn't approve any changes to their salaries.
Essentially, it's as it is what it
Correct.
seems like, yeah.
And, yeah.
And-
Anybody have anything else? Thank you all.
He
Motion
We have
to
a-
adjourn?
I know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You
We have
wanna
a
say
final
something? Oh, you
speaker.
have your speech, yes.
Sorry.
Speech.
And I waited till after y'all voted. I, as staff, being neutral party, so let me give you my disclaimer first. I don't have any relatives on council. I don't have any friends on council. I don't have any neighbors on council, so I have no interest whatsoever in what I am about to share with you. Council members, I would ignore who is in the office today. It's not about the person in the office today. It's about the position.
Sorry.
Our council positions in Kyle have evolved over time. It was very different when City of Kyle was 5,000 or less population as compared to now. We are 60,000 plus population in Kyle, and we are on the trajectory to be 100,000 plus in near terms. So it's no longer a small town, sleepy town that just needs 2 council meetings to approve 1 or 2 ordinances, and that's the end of the business. If you look around, we're bustling with growth. We have major decisions that council has to make and be involved for development purposes, for economic development purposes. We are literally, our council is a full-time body. Some of them have daytime jobs. There will be some future council members that will have jobs and families. So what I'm trying to get at is we need to, or at least recognize that the council positions are no longer a part-time job that you can do after you get done with work or after you get done with playing golf. It's a full-time job. And they're occupied by individuals and occupied in the future by individuals that will have family obligations just like the rest of us. Car payments, mortgage payments, what have you. It is okay to consider it to be a noble position. It is okay to consider it to be a voluntary position. But in all reality, in all practicality, it requires time, right? Time away from their families, time away from their individual obligations that they have at a personal level. So if you were to value that time, then they ought to be compensated at a level that's reasonable, that is practical, that makes sense. If it was a full-time job, which it is, if we wrote a job description for it and did a market analysis, it would now be $1,000 a month, right? It would be a lot more. They would not be subject to overtime. They would be considered a professional class of employees exempt from overtime. If you were to look at exempt employees in the city of Kyle alone on our payroll, on our pay structure, the lowest paid professional is around 50,000, 55,000 roughly. So regardless of what our neighboring cities might be doing, maybe it's old stuff on their books still, we shouldn't really hang our hats on, I think, it's my personal opinion, of what New Braunfels is doing, or what Pflugerville is doing, or what Cedar Park may be doing. This is Kyle. We should think on our own. We're a progressive city. Maybe we should set these standards for everybody else to follow, rather than us following them. So what I'm trying to get at is our $1,000 a month compensation for our council members, current and future, is too low. It ought to be adjusted upwards. Where that should be, it's up to council and taxpayers and committees such as this. But if you were to look at the market, a standard, our market is right here within our own pay structure for our professional staff. Even if you went to the lowest of the lowest professional staff, it is at least $50,000 a year. But it all depends on how taxpayers see it. But I just wanted to share that with this committee, that perhaps it is time to re-examine how we pay our council people. It is a full-time position. It is a full-time responsibility. I mean, like you were saying earlier, if you just count the number of hours they spend in meetings and special call meetings, meeting with their constituents, meeting with developers, meeting with commissioners, meeting with other politicians, with visiting other cities, being the ambassadors of Kyle, representing Kyle. And it's not just the mayor, it's the entire body. Every council does that, more so on the mayor's part, because of that role that position has been made responsible for. So my 2 cents, my observation, my recommendation is that perhaps we should step outside the box and set that gold standard for everybody else to follow, rather than us following everybody else. It is a full-time job. Let's recognize that. Let's compensate for that. That is fair compensation. Just because they're elected officials doesn't mean they have to work for free. I mean, the highest office, elected office in this land gets paid. They don't have to turn in a mileage reimbursement for Air Force One. Our senators, our congresspeople, they're all paid, fully paid elected officials. So I'm not saying we have to go to that extreme, but it ought to be fair compensation. What that fair is up to this committee. That's all I wanted to share tonight with y'all.
So you wanted to wait till the end, but was there a reason you didn't talk about that in the beginning?
Yes.
Because, I mean, I understand why you didn't maybe want to sway, but I guess for me it would have helped, because I've only been in Kyle for 2 years. And all I really have seen, and I know the town is growing, I get that. But I also all I know is what it used to be paid, and then it jumped, it doubled or whatever. So that's what I was based on,
Yeah, I never saw that $100 to $1,000 jump as the same shock that everybody else seemed to have. Because to me, as I said last week, you could not get me to be on city council for $1,000 a month. You could not, right? And to your point, it would take a lot more than $1,000 a month to get me to consider this, because I know what kind of hard work they put in. I know what type of hours they put in. I know what type of arrows get thrown at these guys. I know what type of arrows get thrown at us just for having this conversation, right? And it is crazy to me. So I agree with you. Unfortunately, I feel like it's too late unless somebody wants to make a motion to be able to rediscuss this again. But I agree with you for the record.
And I would like to answer your question.
Right.
It's a fair question. The reason I didn't bring it up beforehand was I did not want to influence the thinking of this body.
But I think you brought in information that would have been,
And you can always reconsider.
well, I mean,
That's, go ahead, Brad.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. I keep bringing up the rule of unintended consequences or I see this as probably one of the last times that I, as a citizen, would say, you know, it can stay the same. I think that Kyle from 3 years from now, I'm not even gonna go 5 years, I think 3 years from now is gonna be totally different. I think, and there's a certain sadness in my eyes, because I moved here in 2008 when it was big, but it wasn't this big. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just don't know if this cycle was the one, but I know it's coming. It's kind of like, I know the time is coming. It's going to take me 40 minutes to get across Kyle, rather than the 20 minutes that I grimaced about. I think the city staff has done a tremendous job in getting us where we're at. And I've been in doing city things like this since about 2012. And it's like watching a child grow up. And we're entering that point, to your point, where it is overwhelming for the city council.
There's another added benefit of fair compensation. It is that it would open up for more people to consider running for an office.
No, that's,
And you could, this is my thoughts, is right now we're paid at not even part-time, right? They're paid at not even part-time wages.
If you divide their compensation by the hours they put in, it is way below federal minimum wage.
Even if you didn't count to that, we're not even at part-time. So if you went up to $2,500 or $3,000 a month, that's still part-time wages, right? You know, so but at the very least, then at that point, somebody could have a part-time job on the side, so
Right.
2 part-time jobs, and actually open up the candidacy for more options.
Participation.
More participation. So I completely agree with your point. So, but I mean, you see, the whole concept of just bringing in a $300 cell phone stipend seems to be it's a very difficult conversation.
So if you raise the compensation, then you don't have to worry about any of the allowances.
Right.
It covers it, right?
And I agree with Brad, and I agree, I do see this being one of the last years that we will hold, or at least myself would look at council's pay being what it needs to be. I'm gonna refer back to, I think we as a community need to see the transparency right now,
I agree with transparency.
so that we, as a citizen, we can take into consideration the hours that are spent financially and within the other communities. Really, because a lot of people, as we know, have been in this community and they're very blind-eyed to not seeing our council members visiting other communities, not being involved to it, some due to commuting from Austin back, but they're not taking that into consideration. So I really think the transparency will open the door to a lot of going, yeah, we probably need to do more compensating. So, but I 100% agree with you. My thoughts are just right now, it's not the time unless we can really show what we are doing.
Okay. And just one final note, if you're concerned about budget, we have funding available.
I think
I think based on what you told us, so I'm more comfortable with the increase in the budget, that's what you know what I'm saying? You know, because that also has gotta go by the, you know, if you're trying to cover all these expenses and give these guys, and enable the council members to do their jobs the way they need to do it, you need to provide more money for them to do it. You know, that's part of it. And you know, do one thing at a time. I mean, it is a 57% increase in the budget, so I think that would go over a little better than doing that and bumping up the salary. My other quick question though is, so this was like, so is the next time it can only be increased in 3 years? It can't be increased any time in between? Okay.
so 3 years. So I agree with you though, Brandy. I think that one of the most important things is transparency. If we can somehow or another make this so that, because the darts come at the council member from the citizens But most importantly, the darts come at the council members from other council members, right? So if every one of the council members have to be on an even playing field, it makes it much easier for all of us to be able to stop throwing darts at each other, right? So I think transparency is very important. So I guess then, in this case, no motion to open this back up. Yeah, so, all right.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I just want to thank you guys for your service.
Thank
I know
you.
this isn't easy to do. It takes time away from your family, so thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you guys too, by the way.
Thank you all.
The amount of effort that's put into this meeting